Hello, dear colleagues. My name is Roman Tarasov. This is my fifth report on this conference. Its topic is Typology of Semantics and Valence Structure of Tropative and Apparetive Verbs. I previously made 3 reports on this conference, dedicated to tropative in different categories of languages. But all of them had to do with syntactic structures, like classes, symmetry, and so on. This time, I will describe these 2 functions, tropative and apparative, from the semantic point of view, on the examples from different categories of languages. Those who listened to my previous reports might remember this, but still. Tropative is a grammatical function x considers y to be z. X is a subject, y is an object, z is a characteristic. For example, I find him smart. X is I, y is he, z is smart. Apparative is another grammatical function. X seems to be y. X is a stimulus, y is a characteristic. For example, he seems to be smart. X is he, y is smart. In my article for the 5th conference, I described the tropative classification system, and for the 9th conference, I adapted it for apparatives. According to it, negative tropative or apparative constructions are x does not consider y to be z, or x does not seem to be y. A pattern is called positive-negative symmetric if both positive and negative constructions exist, and negative constructions are derived from positive. If a language allows both thematic and athematic patterns, it is symmetric. 99% of languages, including Russian, Tatar, English, and Persian, are symmetric. Direct reverse symmetry is as follows. Reverse tropative construction is y is or isn't considered to be z. A pattern is direct reverse symmetric if both direct and reverse constructions exist, and reverse constructions are derived from direct. A language allowing both symmetric and athematic patterns is symmetric. 65% of languages, including Russian, Tatar, English, and Persian, are symmetric. There can be no reverse apparative because apparative is an intransitive function. But the most important classification criterion is tropativity or apparativity class. A construction belongs to the first class if it incorporates a tropative or apparative marker into the characteristic. Like the Arabic tropative, hasuna to be good, istahsana to find good. Or the Klingon apparative, val to be intelligent, vallau to seem intelligent. The construction belongs to the second class if it's analytical but only possesses one finite clause. Like in English, I find him smart or he seems smart. The construction belongs to the third class if it's polypredicative, has more than one finite clause, but expresses all arguments explicitly. Like, I think he is smart, or it seems that he is smart. A tropative construction also belongs to the fourth class if subject is expressed implicitly, like, he is probably smart. It's obvious from the examples that a language can possess constructions of different classes. In this case, it is assigned the highest of existing classes. The less the number, the higher the class. Thus, English has the second class of both tropativity and apparativity. Okay, now tropative will be the first due to the wider range of variety. Tropative verbs exist for the first 3 classes. They can be either triadic or dyadic predicates, while reverse tropative can either be a dyadic or a monadic predicate. The argument structure depends on the tropativity class. In my article for the 9th conference, I introduced the notions of integrating and non-integrating causative verbs. The first group includes verbs that denote both the causation and the caused action, like to enlarge, to strengthen, to feed, and so on. While the second group denotes verbs that only express the causation, like to order, to ask, to cause, and so on. But the same approach can be applied to tropative. In this case, in the first class constructions, tropative verbs are integrating, like istahsana in Arabic. In the lower class constructions, verbs are non-integrating, like think, consider, believe, and so on. All integrating verbs are dyadic predicates in direct constructions and monadic in reverse constructions. Let's look at this. The arguments of such predicates are X, tropative subject, and Y, tropative object. We can see the example from the natural language called Inuktitut as spoken in Canada. For example, the first sentence is a direct construction. The subject first person singular and the object third person singular are marked on a verb. The second sentence is a reverse construction. The intransitive subject third person singular is also expressed on the verb. But the third class constructions are also dyadic predicates. But the arguments are X, subject, and O, content of opinion, which is a subordinate clause Y is Z. X is syntactic subject of a main clause in direct constructions. O can either remain as a subordinate clause in reverse constructions, like it does in the Pomak microlanguage based on 1,000 Bulgarian dialects, like this. Or it can also dissolve in reverse constructions, thus upgrading them to the second class. This situation happens in an auxlang called now. Look at the direct construction. Two finest clauses, me for and mute be pehon. Now look at the reverse construction. It only has one finite clause, mute do for pehon. But the second class constructions are triadic predicates when direct and dyadic when reverse. Always dyadic. X and Y are syntactic subject of a direct and reverse construction respectively. Y is syntactic direct object of a direct construction. Z is a syntactic indirect object of any construction, like in English. I consider him, he is considered to be intelligent. Of course, the argument markers of tropative arguments can coincide. It's probably obvious that coincidence between all the three arguments of a direct construction entails the coincidence of both arguments of reverse construction. Such situation can happen in the neutral alignment languages, like Italman. It's also obvious probably that coincidence between an object and a characteristic in direct constructions entails coincidence between them in reverse constructions. Such situation can happen in the accusative alignment languages, like Volapük. It's worth notion that in such cases, a characteristic marker, characteristic case, is alterating from accusative to nominative when deriving a reverse construction. The same situation can happen in the ergative alignment languages, like avar. But it's much more interesting that the coincidence between the subject and the characteristic in direct constructions entail the coincidence between the object and the characteristic in reverse constructions. Thus, subject marker impacts the markers of the reverse constructions. Situation is like this in most of Turkic languages and Esperanto. And it's again probably obvious that lack of coincidence in direct constructions entails the same in reverse constructions. In such cases, a characteristic is assigned some third case, like instrumental case in Russian. I must also mention that the characteristic marker can alternate not only when a reverse construction is derived, but also when a negative construction is formed. The example is from the Aymara language, spoken in Bolivia. Here, the characteristic marker alternates from ablative to allative. The range of possible polysemy of tropative verbs is also amazing. The most frequent group is expectedly cognition verbs. The verb to count, which is used in the tropative meaning in Russian, Tatar, and Persian, constitutes a counting belt spreading from Iceland to the northern Africa. Other possible options are to consider, to see, to look, to know, which is used in Persian, to find, which gave birth to the name tropative, to understand, to believe. Speech verbs are also met in this meaning, like to say or to name. Verbs of attitude, like to respect. So the soul in early Old slang has no neutral verb, but always expresses attitude, speaker's attitude, subject's attitude towards the characteristic, with the verbs to praise or to scold. It's interesting that verbs of possession are also frequent in the tropative meaning, like to have or to hold. Tropative verb monosemy is also frequent, irrespective of the geographical location of a language. Integrating tropative verbs are inevitably monosemic. The example is from the natural Kildin Sami language. But tropative affixes polysemy itself is also possible. One of the examples is the to-one suffix ırga, to find that or to show oneself that. For example, sonurga is to find you, to be interested, while a kırga is to express generosity, not to find generous. The ni suffix si is multifunctional at all. Deriving new verbs from the other part of speech or other verbs. They can have a tropative meaning, like ulesiuye, from ulen, to be good or good. Or completely other meaning, like alosiori, to teach, from alovori, to give. We can conclude that tropative constructions demonstrate a certain degree of variation of argument structure. Predicates can be triadic or dyadic for direct tropative, dyadic or monadic for reverse tropative. The characteristic is able to have coincidence marking with both a subject and an object. If indirect construction coincides with at least one of these arguments, it coincides with the object in a reverse construction. The characteristic marker can also undergo a marker alteration when a reverse or a negative construction is derived. In terms of polysemy, tropative also shows a surprisingly high degree of variation, with cognition and possession verbs being the most widespread sources. Tropative affixes can also show polysemy. Now let's turn to apparative. It will require much less time and effort. Apparative verbs can be dyadic or monadic predicates, like the reverse tropative predicates. Argument structure also depends on the apparativity class. Again, apparative verbs can be integrating in the first class constructions, and non-integrating is the lower class constructions. Integrating verbs are inevitably monadic predicates, with their only argument being X, stimulus, like in its quill. In the third class constructions, predicates are also monadic, with the only argument being the content of expression, a subordinate clause X is Y, like in Tokipona. The second class predicates are dyadic. X is syntactic subject, Y is an indirect object. Like in English, he seems to be intelligent. And argument marking can also, of course, be coincident. Like in Esperanto, if a characteristic also receives a direct case. Or non-coincident, like, for example, in Russian, where it's assigned another case, the same instrumental case. There is also some certain range of polysemy. The major sources are to appear, to be seen by mistake, to show, or to be similar. Monosemy is also frequent irrespective of the origin and the location of a language. Integrating verbs are inevitably monosemic. Thus, we can make an ultimate conclusion. Apparative constructions demonstrate some degree of variation in terms of both argument structure and in terms of polysemy, which is in both cases by far lower than that of tropative. The reasons for this are the number of arguments and lack of transitivity, and therefore reverse constructions. It might also be the case that apparative is seen as a more core function of a language. Here you can see both articles that I mentioned. Thank you very much for your attention.